Welcome back to the reading of The Broken, written by L. Francis. Episode 2. Chapter 1. The Honeys. The day is bright, breezy and full of hope. Matthew Honey is standing in the living room of his luxury 3-story home, which overlooks the beautiful serenity of a small blissful English beach, and is positioned perfectly just outside the centre of Hythe, south of London, in Folkestone, Kent. The room he stands in is grand, light and airy. Every object has its own place. Not a single item leans so much as a centimetre out of place. This beautiful building with its strong structure stands out from the crowded beachfront. A vision of architectural beauty, this house truly has the wow factor. 2 solid stone white pillars that are at least 20 feet high give the entrance a grand and extravagant impression. The deep brown mahogany front door has been crafted to perfection, with gold trimmings. The arched entrance to the house really sets it apart from the others on the seafront. An enormous window is positioned above the doorway. The house's unique, luxurious exterior was designed by Matthew and Lauren Honey. They had an image in their minds of the home they desired to raise their young in. From that vision, this magnificent building, with its fresh brown brick and multiple huge windows, was constructed. At 47, Matthew Honey is a young widow. He wears an expensive blue tailored suit, designed to fit his slim and toned body to perfection. His dark hair, which has a slight curl to it, is slicked back, with strands of grey peering through on either side. Standing with his back to the tall, immaculate, white living room door, he gazes peacefully out of the window at the sea. He looks up to the piercing blue, crystal clear sky, and watches as delicate white clouds drift gracefully by. A subtle reminder that the world is continually passing with ease. A gentle smile begins to form on Matthew's handsome face as he sees 2 seagulls glide overhead. Reaching up to the collar of his white, crisp shirt, he corrects his tie. Once he has perfected his appearance, Matthew takes a deep breath, almost filling his lungs, then pushes the air from his body in a huge sigh. A sigh of relief, a sigh of despair, a sigh of forgiveness. Who knows? Closing his eyes to embrace the moment, Matthew senses vibrations from the floor beneath him. As he is partially deaf in his right ear, he has increased sensitivity to vibrations in the environment around him. His body now absorbs the tingling sensation, his nerves reacting to the movement. Matthew can now hear the stampede-like footsteps coming from behind him. He seems unalarmed by the noise. A voice calls out, clear as day, "There you are." Immediately, Matthew begins to smile. He knows exactly who these elephant feet belong to. Turning slightly to look over his shoulder, he sees his miracle, his blessing, his beautiful one and only daughter, Eve. She's dressed extremely smartly for a 16-year-old girl, in a deep grey fitted suit with a white blouse. Her makeup has been painstakingly applied to her face. It must have taken hours. With her hair pulled back into a bun on the top of her head and a black pair of kitten heels on her feet, she has mastered the corporate look. Matthew beams with pride as he looks directly at his lifesaver, who stands in the doorway, looking somewhat concerned and slightly frustrated at her dad's lack of response. Waving her arms around in an "is anybody home" gesture, she says, Hello, Dad. We're going to be late at this rate." He walks across the room to Eve and places his hand under her chin. You could spend an eternity searching the entire universe, and you would struggle to find a bond tighter than exists between this father and his daughter. His eyes oozing love, and his heart beginning to warm, he replies, "Eve, you worry far too much." Eve tuts and raises her eyebrows. "Well, someone has to," she responds, rolling her eyes. Smiling at her mocking yet heartfelt words, Matthew glances down at the glistening necklace visible through the gap in her blouse. Closing his eyes, he feels an immediate sense of discomfort and agony as he hears a pained scream in his mind. Not just any scream. It's the high-pitched screaming of a suffering child, hurting internally and externally. Quickly opening his eyes, Matthew looks at his daughter and holds her tight. Eve doesn't question this, giving in to the embrace. Releasing Eve from his arms, Matthew cups the heart-shaped locket hanging on the white gold necklace, a vision of beauty in its simplistic elegance and filled with deep memories of the irreplaceable kind. As tears of sorrow form in his eyes, he relives a precious memory. Eve is standing on her tippy toes, balancing on a white-painted wooden chair next to the solid mahogany island in the center of the kitchen. The chair she is standing on so innocently in her excitement is special, and has been handcrafted especially for her. On the seat is a detailed painting of a magical purple and pink unicorn. On the back, Evelyn Jade is carved into the wood, painted with luminous pink paint, and sprinkled with what Eve would call her magical fairy dust, which is actually silver glitter. This is a very blessed child, who has two very loving parents. She's wearing a mucky pinafore, and her facial expression is pure and sweet. Matching plaits are draped over her shoulders, hanging either side of her tiny infant features. Eve's usual cheeky grin is plastered across her face. She's clapping her tiny hands together, and dry white flour fills the air, spreading around the kitchen. It coats everything it lands on, like snow on a winter's night. Lauren reaches out to their precious daughter, and playfully presses cake mix on the tip of her nose. She looks her usual radiant, happy, beautiful self. A twinkle comes from the necklace hanging around his wife's neck. The very same necklace that Eve now proudly wears. Matthew closes his eyes tight, embracing the memory, but removes himself from the moment. It's too painful to relive. Eve looks up at her dad and says these simple yet heart-wrenching words. "I miss her." Matthew responds, "Evelyn Jade, honey, you remind me of her every day. Your mum would be so proud of the beautiful, courageous, strong young lady you've become. I know it." Matthew acknowledges that he's been lost since he was forced to say goodbye to his wife, his soulmate. From that day on, he became nothing more than a wandering lost soul, destined not to live, but merely to exist. Without this amazing woman, he feels he is nothing. Snapping out of the moment before he cries uncontrollably, Matthew holds Eve and says, "Let's go to the cafe." Having regained his composure, he stares proudly at his daughter. She frowns and says, "But, you're meeting." Matthew smiles ever so gently. He's gone from the depths of despair, wondering why he's alive, to staring at his blessing, the reason he lives. "Eve, you should know me by now." 2 words. Extra hour. Squinting her eyes, she reaches out and gently taps him on the arm in a cheeky manner. Every time Matthew has a meeting or an event, he tells Eve the time is an hour earlier than it actually is, or he has to deal with her chasing him. Matthew's view is that taking your time is a much more productive and effective way to function. Since going through the traumatic experience of losing his wife, he doesn't like rushing or being rushed. It's now a huge pet hate of his. Life is too short, and Matthew has absolutely no desire to spend any of his time stressed out, anxious or upset. Shaking her head, Eve hugs her dad and says, "Cafe it is then." As he drives along the country roads in his brand new, immaculate, shark grey Porsche Cayenne, kitted out with full cream leather interior, Matthew looks over at Eve. She has her elbow resting gently on the window, her chin relaxing on her hand as she gazes up at the canopy of trees. They stand strong, forming an arch on each side that meet in the middle. A true vision of beauty. The sun's natural glow peeps through the tiny gaps between the leaves, creating a magical effect. The journey is serene, the roads are clear. For Matthew, life is in the air, along with a bright feeling, the feeling that anything can happen. Endless possibilities, wonderful new beginnings. They've been through the worst thing any living person could imagine going through, losing a loved one. Surely life could only get better. Matthew thinks back to a time when the words "losing a loved one" used to make him think of losing an elderly relative or a friend to a tragic illness. But the soul that he and Eve so tragically lost wasn't just anyone. Their loved one was once present in their lives every day. She was very cruelly and abruptly taken away. No time to say goodbye, no notification, nothing. She was taken by circumstances out of their control. Completely powerless, they had to stand by and watch. As he drives through the peaceful countryside, Matthew reflects on the bitter sadness of having to continue his life without her magic and beauty every single day. Really, What could be worse than that? Matthew looks again at Eve, who continues to stare out the window. He recalls that there were times when their relationship was very strained. They never understood each other well. They never made time to get to know each other. As the years went by and Eve grew up, Matthew thought she was a complete pain in the butt, especially when she hit puberty. And Eve probably thought he was old, uninteresting, and a complete embarrassment, he thinks to himself, shaking his head wryly. But going through a mentally traumatic experience and only having each other to lean on, mourn with, and keep going for, had brought them closer than he could have ever imagined. He was physically and mentally dragged away from his wife, and Eve was separated in the same manner from her mum. This tragedy gave them a strong connection once they finally pulled together. When he had no desire to live this constantly horrific and pained existence, Eve was the energy that lifted his soul, and vice versa. Eve flicks on the radio. A familiar song begins to play throughout the car. It's the greatest hits of the 80s hour. Matthew looks over at her. The music makes her smile, and she begins to dance theatrically, singing along to the music. Admittedly, her dance moves aren't the best, and actually, to be honest, they're kind of tragic. But this has never stopped her before, and it's certainly not going to stop her now, as she continues without a care in the world. She is strapped tightly in her seatbelt and dancing on the spot. Her eyes are closed, and she's singing the lyrics, moving around like no one's watching. Opening her eyes, Eve says, "I love this song." "How do you know this song?" "This is mine and your mum's era." Laughing cheekily, she continues to sing. "Don't worry, Dad, I haven't been going through your lame music collection," she says. "Oi, leave it out, you cheeky bugger. My music collection is classic." She makes an expression of mock shock at her dad's name calling. "We've been learning about this in music class. How cruel is this, right? Did you know it's actually about a blind woman? I mean, hello, she's blind, for God's sake. Not being funny, Dad, but I think the guy who wrote this is a little bit sick." Matthew laughs at her innocence. "Our music group has been chosen to perform this song at the end-of-year concert." Pulling up at the traffic lights, Matthew quickly turns his attention to Eve. As clear as day, he can remember sitting at the breakfast bar, deep in thought checking his accounts. And Eve, peering around the fridge door, with a packet of wafer-thin ham in her hand, munching away as she says, "Don't forget, it's my end-of-year concert on the 7th of July. It's starting at 2:30, and this year it's wait for it, Sunday. Yay. So you should definitely be able to come." Matthew sits stiff in the driver's seat, both hands clutching the steering wheel. His face oozes guilt. "You are coming, aren't you?" Matthew attempts to appear somewhat confident, but a look of worry begins to spread across his face. He rarely gets to attend Eve's performances due to his demanding work commitments. Ordinarily, she's very forgiving, but this is her last ever end-of-year concert as she leaves school this year. "Dad, you must be there. It's my last performance. You've missed every single one." "Yes, of course, darling. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Eve nods, seemingly satisfied with his words. The traffic lights turn green, and they both start nodding and singing in sync with the music blasting through the car as they drive away. Come back tomorrow for the next episode of The Broken. You can also purchase the entire series on Amazon. If you have Kindle Unlimited, the series is completely free. Just type The Broken, A.L. Francis, in your Amazon search bar. See you tomorrow.